Hi, this is Paul. I'm on vacation, wasn't sure what I would do with videos. I did listen to Christian Baxter and Rereading's Randos convo. I thought it was excellent. Christian's been putting some great stuff out on his channel, so if you haven't been to Christian's channel, you should find it. The link is below. Usually when I go on vacation, I get some time to listen to videos. I'll convince my wife to listen to some of what I listen to, and others of it I get little bits and pieces here and there. But one of the things that I've wanted to notice was the intersection between Peter Thiel's analysis of lack of progress and this more common pervasive narrative of too much change. And I thought Christian Baxter and Nick Freerillian's conversation dealt with a lot of that in terms of sort of echoing what Cale Zeldin said in terms of all the bodies are buried after the post-war. You have these massive changes. I think it was Paul Rene who made the comment about towns being hollowed out, and Nick picked up on that from the live stream last Friday and talked about just his little town of Lincoln that his family is from. And I've seen that all over. At the same time, it's also important to remember, I remember Mary Harrington talking about the social changes that happen in the Industrial Revolution, where you have this massive urbanization, this massive transition of the majority of the population going from farming into the industrial centers. And of course, this sort of leads first wave feminism, because now suddenly with those traditional roles broken, people have to figure out how to live, and a big change in that is the change of how men and women have to live. And of course, if you follow on with Mary Harrington, you'll then get into contraception and how that changes the equation. And then, of course, to Mary Harrington and Rafe Kelly's excellent conversation about sort of the two sides of, don't worry, can't see you. The two sides of feminism, feminism of caring and feminism of, I think it was liberation, something like that. So I don't know if I'll drop a couple clips from that video into this one or not. I'm going to start out with Peter Thiel and his conversation with Ross Douthat, and then the Freerillian Christian Baxter conversation, a clip from there, and maybe also a clip. The Friday live stream wound up going for about 4 hours, and so I know when people see a 4-hour video, they tend to shrink back. And I haven't done any clipping from that video yet, but that sort of launches off from the tweet from Jordan Hall, which I think really got into this issue, because in a way, Jordan Hall, on the other side of sort of this cyber transhuman revolution, we have this desire, which is very much there with Freerillian. Baxter still lives in the small town that he grew up in Arkansas. The main, part of the main divide right now is rural-urban. You can see that politically in the United States. I think you're seeing that in other places in Europe, but it's not like rural or non-urban areas in the West have been untouched. In fact, there's sort of a re-ruralization. When I go on vacation, I don't tend to go to urban areas. I tend to go to rural areas, but the internet can be found in these rural areas, and you can find nice hotels and beautiful restaurants in these rural areas and in these secluded places. And so it's never the case that that one thing changes and the other is left untouched. Everything gets changed. And part of what we saw in COVID was people going back to areas where they had internet access. And so, say, look at someone like Elon Musk's Skynet. Now we have internet access everywhere. iPhones and other phones are adding satellite texting. And so part of what we struggle with all of this is trying to find language and framing that adequately addresses the breadth and scope of change. Thiel talks about this when he talks with Douthat, but we don't really have the language yet for when politicians go out there and look at right track, wrong track. People have an instinctive, intuitive sense of things are getting better, things are getting worse. But if you have any awareness of, let's say, the combinatorial aspect of life, and as Peter Thiel sort of mentions, we try to do the math between all the different variables, and we sort of have to average, but of course there's no such thing as an average person or an average life or an average situation. Every person life has its own dramatic, enormously complex differentiations from everyone else. And so people in the midst of, so on one hand, Peter Thiel says, we're not progressing like we should. If you go from the 1780s to the 1970s, in certain aspects, transportation was getting faster, economics were growing. And if you might look and say, okay, well, the 1970s, 1960s, and 1970s, we have all of this dramatic social change. And did the social change happen because the physical velocity change slowed down, and so this is us catching our breath, trying to catch up with other areas of life? Or did the reality of such massive, traumatic, dislocating social change cause us to do things that slowed down all of the other industrial, technological velocity changes? I don't know. But I think they're good questions because obviously, Tom Holland is working on his book where he basically says that the 1960s should be seen somewhere like the beginning of the 16th century in terms of scope of change. Now, again, if you go back to Carlos Ayer's book, Reformations, the massive changes that happened in the 16th century are in some ways inaugurated by the Columbian Exchange, which is Columbus makes landfall in Americas. Spain is taken from the Muslims. Obviously, the Spanish Habsburg with all of the gold and silver that comes over from the New World. They have huge changes that comes to Spain. Of course, the Habsburgs sort of split and govern Europe. I've been, thinking a lot more about Habsburgs lately. And so you have all of this massive, massive change. And Tom Holland writing this book now about the 1960s, we have all this societal change. And it's interesting that sort of coincides with the date that Peter Thiel, and to the degree Eric Weinstein is following him in looking at the 1970s as the beginning of decadence or the beginning of this slowing. We don't have flying cars. When in the 1980s they imagined what 2015 would look like, we had flying cars and flying skateboards and Velcro that would wrap itself, and none of those things came to be. So on one hand, you've got Peter Thiel saying, well, has progress slowed? Why? And then Peter Thiel will look at things like one world government, and Peter Thiel wants more risk taking, which seems easy to say as a billionaire, and not so comfortable to say if you're down among the working class schleps and minions that are going to be the ones to, have all the blood spilled or have all the chaos in their relationships. So when I listen to, let's say, Christian Baxter and Rereading and a lot of the other people in the corner, I hear them saying the social change has been way too dramatic and that should all slow down. And so they're kind of, here we are. So the rest of this video will be a bunch of clips, and let me know what you think in the comment section.
Yes, I still broadly believe in the stagnation thesis. It was never an absolute thesis. So the claim was not that we were absolutely completely stuck. It was in some ways a claim about that the velocity had slowed. It wasn't, zero, but that we were, I don't know, from 1750 to 1970, 200 plus years were periods of accelerating change where we're, we're moving faster. The ships were faster, the railroads were faster, the cars were faster, the planes were faster. It culminates in the Concorde and the Apollo missions, and then that in all sorts of dimensions, things had slowed. There was, I always made an exception for the world of bits. So we had, computers and software and internet and mobile internet. And then, the last 10, 15 years, you had crypto and the AI revolution, which I think is in some sense pretty big. But the question is, is it enough to really get out of this generalized sense of stagnation? And there's an epistemological question you can start with on the Back to the Future essays. How do we even know whether we're in stagnation or acceleration? Because one of the features of late modernity is that people are hyper specialized, and so can you say that we're not making progress in physics unless you've devoted half your life to studying string theory? Or what about quantum computers? Or what about cancer research and biotech and the sort of all these verticals? And then how much does progress in cancer count versus string theory? And so you have to give weightings to all these things. So it's in theory, it's an extremely difficult question to get a handle of, because the fact that it's so hard to answer, that we have ever narrower groups of guardians guarding themselves, is itself cause for skepticism. And so yes, I think broadly we're in this world that's still pretty stuck. It's not absolutely stuck.
Yeah, you mentioned Back to the Future, and we just showed our kids the original Back to the Future, the first one with Michael J. Fox, and of course,
it was like 1955 to 1985,
right.
30 years back, and then the Back to the Future 2 was, I think, 1985 to 2015, which is now a decade in the past, and that's where you had flying cars, and the 2015 future is wildly divergent from
the 2015 future did have Biff Tannen as a Donald Trump-like figure in some kind of power, so it had some kind of prescience. But yeah, the big noticeable thing is just how different the built environment looks. And so one of the strongest cases for stagnation that I've heard is that, yeah, if you put someone in a time machine from various points, they would recognize themselves to be in a completely different world if they left 1860
or 1890 to 1970. If you live, those are the 80 years of your lifetime, right. Something like that.
But the world, just to my kids, even as children of 2025, looking at 1985, it's like the cars were a little different and no one has phones, but the world seems fairly similar. So that's a kind of non-statistical, but
that's
I think
the common sense.
That's
intuition.
A common sense understanding. But are there what would convince you that we were living through a period of takeoff? Is it just economic growth? Is it productivity growth? What are there numbers for stagnation versus dynamism that you look at?
Sure, it would be the economic number would just be how what are your living standards compared to your parents? If you're a 30-year-old millennial, or how are you doing versus when your boomer parents were 30 years old? How did they do at the time? There are intellectual questions. How much, how many breakthroughs are we having? How do we quantify these things? Like, what are the returns of going into research? There certainly are diminishing returns to going into science or going into academia generally. And then maybe this is why so much of it feels like this sociopathic Malthusian kind of an institution, because you have to throw more and more and more at something to get the same returns. And at some point, people give up and the thing collapses.
Well, right. So let's pick up on that. Why should we want growth and dynamism? Because as you've pointed out in some of your arguments on the subject, right, there is a kind of cultural change that happens in the Western world in the 1970s, around the time you think things slow down, start to stagnate, where people become very anxious about the costs of growth, the environmental costs above all.
Yes.
And the idea being, you end up with a widely shared perspective that we're sort of rich enough, and if we try too hard to get that much richer, the planet won't be able to support us. We'll have, degradation of various kinds, and we should be content with where we are. So what's wrong with that argument?
Well, I think there are deep reasons the stagnation happened. So, there are always three questions you ask about history. What actually happened? And there's a question you get to, what should be done about it? But there's also this intermediate question, why did it happen? People ran out of ideas. I think to some extent, the institutions degraded and became risk averse, and sort of these cultural transformations we can describe. But then I think to some extent also people had some very legitimate worries about the future, where if we continue to have accelerating progress, were you accelerating towards environmental apocalypse or nuclear apocalypse or things like that? But I think, if we don't find a way back to the future, I do think the society, it unravels. It doesn't work. The way the middle class, I would define the middle class as the people who expect their kids to do better than themselves. And when that expectation collapses, we no longer have a middle class society. And maybe there's some way you can have a feudal society in which things are always static and stuck, or maybe there's some way you can shift to some radically different society. But it's not the way the Western world, it's not the way the United States has functioned for the first 200 years of its existence.
So you think that ordinary people won't accept stagnation in the end? It's that they will rebel and sort of pull things down around them in the course of that rebellion?
They may rebel, or our institutions don't work. All of our institutions are predicated on growth.
Right. Our budgets are certainly predicated on growth.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you say, Reagan and Obama, Reagan was sort of consumer capitalism, which is oxymoronic. It was, you borrow, you don't save money as a capitalist, you borrow money. And Obama was low-tax socialism, just as oxymoronic as, the consumerist capitalism of Reagan. And I like low-tax socialism way better than high-tax socialism. But I worry that it's not sustainable. At some point, either the taxes go up or the socialism ends. So it's deeply, deeply unstable, and that's why people they're not optimistic. They don't think we've hit some stable, the Greta future. Maybe it can work.
This
but
is
we're
the
not
Greta
yet there.
Thunberg. Just to be clear, that's a reference to Greta Thunberg, the activist best known for anti-climate change protests, who, to you, I would say, represents a kind of symbol of a anti-growth, effectively authoritarian, environmentalist-dominated future.
Sure, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. It'd be like a very, very different society if you really
actually lived in a kind of degrowth, small Scandinavian villages.
I'm not sure it'd be North Korea, but it would be super oppressive.
Well, so I think. Go ahead.
So I have substantive disagreement.
I know you will, but that's
just
okay.
about everything here. I mean, it's and I'm trying to think how much I want to say. So I think the obsession with being an individual person is just fundamentally bad, and it leads most people astray.
Mm.
Your life is not your own. Individualism is compatible with suicide, but Christians consider suicide a sin. You don't have that level of autonomy or ownership over your life that you can end it like that. Your life is not your own. You belong to a community. Well, you should belong to a community. You should belong to God. But I want to attack this in a number of directions.
One second, I just want to stop you because I'm saying person and not individual for a reason. Because Aquinas defines a person as a relation. So a person is not something which is defined in a kind of atomized way, the way we use the word individual. A person exists always and only in relation. So there's always a relational context. But
I mean, I'm not. I have to admit, I'm not particularly interested in Aquinas's mental gymnastics. Like, I think here's the thing.
Well, but it's not irrelevant because we believe that personhood is an attribute of divinity itself in the Holy Trinity. So it's actually not just irrelevant mental gymnastics. In understanding the importance of personhood as a concept and what it means is actually very, very critically important theological idea.
Well, I mean, to me, there's theology here, but that's
we are made in the image of God. So
I think focusing on theology helps us to avoid some obvious brutal facts about how we have transformed ourselves since the Enlightenment. In a more natural context, let's say, and I always come back to this, like the small Greek village, small Greek farming village.
Mm-hmm.
When two young people get married in the village, everyone cares because you're more or less living on subsistence. Some years you have better years, some years you have worse, but everyone has to be involved and working in order to just get by and get enough to eat, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And so, men and women, when they get married, they're dependent on each other. Women are dependent on the men for their survival. So, even without the community pushing them back together, there's some natural incentives that make it difficult, to just break up a marriage. And so a lot of these natural relations come out of necessity. And you have the church at the center of the village. The whole thing revolves around the church calendar, and everything has significance. And there's, the harvest festival in the fall, and Pascha is is about spring and renewal. And there's an aspect to the traditional Lenten fast that has to do with the end of winter going into spring, where there may be just less food and you have to get by on less.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this connection to the gospel story and eternity and the cycle you go through every year, but it's also connected to the actual facts on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And in that context, there are very few fully developed persons or individuals in the community. Whatever the equivalent of the mayor in the town, who's the civil head, he's probably well developed as an individual, and hopefully the priest is well developed as an individual, and maybe there are people here and there that are, but most people are getting their identities from the village and or their tribe or their family. Most people are not going to be capable of actualizing this individuation, and that's just normal. But the whole group is the body, and that's the real entity here. But what happens with the Enlightenment is that the people that are capable of individuation, like the Renaissance painters, like Leonardo da Vinci and that stuff, and people like Francis Bacon, it's not so. They talk about freedom and independence and liberty, but what that really is they want to cut themselves off from the body and not have to support the body. In this traditional systems like the feudalism or in this village, if I'm the head,
but they are supporting the body, though.
I don't.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly how they're like. Let's take the example of Leonardo. Okay, it's pretty obvious the way in which Leonardo supports the body. The creation of beauty is supporting the body.
I see what you're saying, and I think I don't agree with it, because if
man shall not live by bread alone.
But that's not. But you got to think, it's not enough that someone is producing beauty. You got to think about how.
No, it is enough, because there are different modes of labor, and all of them can be used to benefit our fellows.
But we gotta think about the context. The context is what matters here. If I'm the head of the Greek village, my survival depends upon the work of the people, and I owe them things like protection and guidance. I'm bringing down heaven to these people, and they're raising up earth, and that's what makes the body work. Now, if I'm some kid and I want to go off to Florence and become a painter, sure, I'm creating beauty, and maybe there are some nobles that enjoy that, and maybe that has a similar function, but that's qualitatively different than me being an artisan in that village creating beauty for the people in that village. By separating myself from where I came from, I'm not actually acting in the same way as a local artisan. And that what happens is heads start separating from the body. You get this separation of these elites from these lower classes, and as trade and techne develops, you can have wealth, you can have plenty and all that stuff, but you no longer have proper bodies. And what you get is ideological movements, like in the 70s and 80s, the punks. Like, so the people who dressed up like punks are not individuals. They think they're individuals.
No, right? Yeah.
But that's what happens is you get the elites who can ascend, and then you've got a head that's separated from a body, and you've got a body that's separated from a head. And where the punks would have gotten, like, for example, Oktoberfest, they have traditional dress. We've got a town in Texas on I-35 called West Texas, even though it's not in West Texas. That was a Czech settlement, and they still have their version of Oktoberfest called Westfest, and they dress in their traditional garb, and people come in, but it's a carnival, it's a theme park version of it. But in traditional villages like in Bavaria, they would have the Oktoberfest or whatever, but it was part of this whole cycle, and people lived this life, and they got their identity from their tribe, their group or whatever, and they were one body. But as the Enlightenment progresses and elites separate themselves, and you get cosmopolitanism. What you get is you've got these head centers, which are the city, which just consume people that can.
Well, I think for the kind of thing you're talking about, I think you have to go further back historically than that. I would say that I think it's definitely, this is happening well before the Enlightenment.
Maybe
the minute you have an urban elite develop in history,
I mean,
you have this process going on.
That's fine. But my point is not an accurate, detailed history.
Right.
My point is that what we've been doing is cities have been eating the small towns to keep themselves going. And that's why small towns have collapsed in America and in other places. And what you do is you get your lottery ticket at a fancy university, you move to the city, maybe at best you have 1 or 2 kids, maybe you move out to suburbia, but we're eating we're eating these old bodies to feed cosmopolitanism. Mm-hmm. And the urban industrialization that happened in the 19th and 20th centuries, that really accelerated this process, and part of it was driven by farm automation, making it need less labor, people flooding the cities because of that, and because of this conveyor belt, assembly line capitalism, it's obvious why this innate desire for collectivism would come and take shape around something like communism and things like that. But unions and communism is not the solution. Being in a tribe for people who need to receive an identity, that's the best place for them. And what happens as a result of what we've done is we get these remainders, like all the homeless in Southern California, all these people with mental illness. They would, there was a mandate in tribes that you take care of your people. Mm-hmm. And when you will yourself down to nuclear families in the individual, you get assisted living for old people, you get homeless on the streets, and industrial grade solutions to this, like the insane asylums, that's still a Band-Aid, and it's obvious why people reacted in horror to that stuff. But even if we tried to redo that stuff to try and clean things up a bit, that wouldn't fundamentally solve the problem. What you need in order to buttress yourself against these large egregores like Google and the multinational corporations, those things can only exist because we've destroyed the tribes, and there's no proper counterweight to these huge bodies that just eat up individuals and spit them out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the sick thing is that we preach democracy, we preach individualism, we preach self-actualization, and that just becomes material gain, and that sort of stuff becomes what people use to substitute for having an identity handed down to them in a proper structure. And this is why I say tribalism is inevitable, because there has to be a level of collectivism. And when we force everyone to individuate, it's natural to have things like feminism come in and to divide men and women into political classes, and for political entrepreneurs to use that political division to their advantage. And the idea that your identity is being a woman or being a man or being a particular race or whatever, that's the best we can do outside of tribalism in this high scale, uber individualistic system that we have. And the only way to have proper identity for everyone is to have ethnos and a tribal body where the most competent guy is the head of it, and he is obligated to take care of the people below him, and everyone has a particular role in the body.
Mm.
And outside of that, people are just becoming alcoholics and taking Fent on the streets of San Francisco and drowning themselves in, I hesitate to say sexual satisfaction, because the promiscuity is, it may satisfy for a moment, but it doesn't really solve what people desire. But because of how we've allowed things to be, we've allowed things to get to this state, it's very hard to build something that works, because the acid of liberalism, no matter what you try to build, whether it's an Orthodox church or it's a marriage, it's going to come at you. And you have to reset the whole, not exactly reset the whole thing, but you need a different set of structures and a different set of rules to make things that actually work and last. This idea that, I'm going to plant trees that my grandchildren will find shade under.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that I'm going to start a cathedral that is not going to get finished for hundreds of years. We don't do that stuff anymore, because that stuff comes out of this tribal identity. It comes out of these obligations. And when you erase all of that, you get
there's a lot of other things that come along with tribal identity too. That it's not like everything you get out of tribal identity is only an unqualified good.
Nothing is free. I'm just saying, like, the human scale is the tribal scale. The modern industrialized, individualized liberalism is the demonic egregore scale, where people are just pawns that are used. That's why people who shipped manufacturing over to Asia, they didn't feel any particular obligation to the peoples whose jobs they were destroying, because the goal is GDP line go up. It's not we have obligations to those below, and those below us have obligations to us. When you separate the head far enough, then the head is just going to scheme in whatever way that works best for the head, because it's detached from the body. But the only way to have a proper head and body relationship is it to be scaled small enough that the identity flows through the whole body. But something like Google or the federal government, that's always going to separate head and body in a way that makes that impossible.
Yeah, but I just don't see any, well, first of all, I think you bring up a lot of excellent points, and there's a lot of things I would agree with. I would want to push back.
You are scared of tribalism because of the pseudo-tribal egregores of the 20th century communism and fascism, which are just, those are products of this same system. They're not the same thing as tribalism. And the thing about tribalism is that there are bad things that come with it.
Yes.
Like, you don't, in a tribal situation, you don't own yourself. You can't just leave and go to college without permission. But the positive sides of that come along with the negative side of that. Like, we have this town, we have this village, it maintains itself because people just come in and people can't just leave. You have obligations and duties and responsibility. And what we've done is we've told everyone, you've got rights. Eat, pray, love. Do whatever feels good. And that is killing us. Our birth rate shows that. The mental illness shows that. And to me, it's like, what we're doing isn't working. That's all there is to it. And we cannot save or redeem this, as far as I can tell. As much as people want their micro craft brews at the convenience store and the cheap coffee delivered from all regions of the world and all the avocados they could ever eat and Disney World. That's great, but we are entering an eschaton that is going to end this stuff.
Mhm.
And I've studied enough history. I have a big affection for China because of my my training in Taoist philosophy and Taoist inner alchemy and my love of traditional Chinese tea. I'm not sure where I was going.
No, you're being very articulate, and you're making your case very well. And there's a lot of things I would agree with you on. I just don't know. I think I would probably want to have another conversation where I would try to.
I remember where I was going.
Go for it.
The Tao Te Ching and Sun Tzu's Art of War, and Kung Fu Tzu, Confucius, his work. All of that happened when the Chinese Empire at the time was transitioning into the Warring States period.
Gotcha.
And for whatever reason, because of my Eastern leanings, I'm not that up on Rome. I'm not obsessed with Rome, though probably I should be as an Orthodox Christian. What happens is it's a Tower of Babel situation. You build too high, you build too wide. The head separates from the body, and eventually communication between the head and the body falls completely apart. And what happened in China is it more or less split into multiple states that congealed into 3 states with warlords running them, all of them trying to vie for being the authentic Chinese empire. And
do you ever play Romance of the Three Kingdoms?
No.
Okay.
And that's where we are now. And I said this somewhere else, but the internet, but before that, mass media and our shipping channels, the containerization and all the stuff that America did post World War II, the internet and our trade system, that is the American version of the Roman road. And the various forms of Christianity are akin to the Jewish diaspora in the Second Temple period. And we are going to enter, excuse me for prophesying, we are going to enter into a period where these Roman roads bringing Christianity back together in a sense. We're going to have a Pentecost type moment. And the temple is going to get destroyed. I don't know what that means. And the American empire is going to fall apart. And we are going to enter a warring states period. And the only thing that can come out of that is tribalism, because in the absence of globalism, the poverty that follows is going to necessitate people to actually work together.
Right. I would say, boy, I have so much to say. I wanted this is your time though. And so we'll just have to talk again later. I'll bring you back on again, and then I'll push back really hard. But for now, I want this to be your moment. And so I'll let you have the final word. And I think that you're bringing the things that you are talking about, although I do not fully agree with you at all. I have a very strongly opposing opinion. However, the things that you're pointing at are important. And I also share your sense that we are living through apocalyptic times. So that we could definitely agree on that. I just don't necessarily agree about what direction it needs to go to be resolved.
I mean, but
Topics definitely have an intersection. Jordan is responding to a tweet from Bumbadum that says, "I'm begging boomers to come up with a better vision for this country than go work minimum wage at a convenience store in the middle of nowhere and die in poverty. And there's always an interesting dynamic. You know, one of the things I really noticed during the woke phase was whenever you use sort of these metaphors of power, you tend to infantilize the victim. And this is something that African-American leaders, you know, someone like Greg Lowry would push back on and say, you know, Glenn Lowry, that's right, Glenn Lowry. Why on one hand you say these people are the problem, and yet you keep begging them to fix it. And if for the last 50 years they've demonstrated to you that they're not your friend, why do you imagine they're going to suddenly turn it now? And so what's the deal with that move? So Jordan responds to that by saying this long tweet: I'll take a swing, dead center of Gen X here, so take it for what you will. Don't look to boomers for vision or even support. That's kind of, again, a Glenn Lowry point. Gen X has known that since at least the early 80s, probably earlier. If some flip and turn out to be helpful, that's pure upside. Here's the frame. Y'all are at war. It's a very different kind of war than the kids storming Normandy at beaches at Normandy faced, but that is the right mindset. You need to be on a wartime footing, else nothing will make sense. Now, the best way of thinking about your war is that it's a spiritual war, of which fifth generation war is a big part. The enemy isn't going to kill your kids. He's going to get you to do that, or to get them themselves to kill themselves, or cause you to never have any kids, or cause them to choose merely survival over life. Get the sense of it? That pretty much brings in a lot of the different pitches that we've had.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who's the enemy in this post? Is it like boomers or like the devil or
well,
something else?
Let's ask that question once I finish the read.
Okay.
In a way, the boys at Normandy had a simpler task. The enemy was over there, and we were trying really hard to kill you. In your war, the enemy is everywhere and nowhere. He's between you and your wife, you and your parents, you and your kids, between your mind and your heart, especially between your heart and God. It's tough to face things like just getting a decent job, being able to own a home, being able to raise a family as war, but that's the way it is. No human authority is coming to save you. Nothing is fair. Every legacy institution is corrupt and incompetent. You have to muster a subtle quality of intense courage, find allies who are capable of being brothers in arms, and begin to figure out how to fight this fight. Then win it, fully accepting that death, or worse, is a perfectly plausible outcome. My advice, from whatever wisdom I've acquired: focus locally. Flesh and blood is more trustworthy than virtual. The net is useful, but don't over-index. If you can build a community of 100 who are made of the right stuff, you'll have a real chance. Hyper-local. Get yourself sorted, physically, psychologically, relationally. Your integrity is non-negotiable. A man without integrity is less than worthless. Connect with other functional communities and help each other. Sometimes it's operating doctrine, sometimes technology, sometimes it will require a physical presence. Why WNC, West North Carolina, assume that means folks know what I'm talking about here.
Western North Carolina.
Western North Carolina. Excuse me.
God bless you.
Cultivate discernment and gift your attention wisely, figuring out who is better at telling a more meaningful truth and not being dragged down rabbit holes is life and death. Again, a man without integrity is less than worthless. Go to church. If you don't have a church worth attending, find one or start one. You're going to need God. Here's the good news. These are the bad times. But if you become strong men, you will be the ones who create good times. And then, of course, there was the follow-up tweet and about from Loki. Maybe the real gods were the friends we made all along the way. If you don't have dream, you'll be baked into someone else's pie and you'll be consumed. 21st century problems require 21st century solutions, not 14th, not 18th, and not 4th. Jordan Hall responds, proposed. The frame of 21st century problems, solutions is a 20th century frame. The proper and only real response to the 21st century is eternal. Proposition granted. Eternal problems require eternal solutions. Do you have anything in addition you'd like to say with respect to that, Gray? Because you won the vote.
I mean, there's so much there. No, I think rereading it, it just strikes me that there's a ton of connections to what pretty much everybody was referring to with their pitches within what Jordan said there, which is a lot. Hearing you read it again, I think I'm struck again by the way that he did a great job, or started out in this like very macro wide frame and then zooms in very much to like the point about hyperlocal is literally managing yourself spiritually, physically, relationally, and then back out to connecting with other communities that laid beside the frame of warfare, or within the frame of warfare, I think is just a really interesting juxtaposition. So no, I don't have a ton to add, but just I think it was useful for sure to read it again.
Probably my vote would have been Zach in terms of the death and divorce. But I think, as Laura's interjection gets at, there's part of what you have to sort of do when you read this tweet is ask yourself, okay, what's salvation? What's perdition? What's war? What good are we striving for? And that really connects, I think, also with Cale's point of an implicit bias. And I think even going after the Second World War, you have soldiers and families. You have an entire world that has just been soaked in trauma. And I deal with this partly because a big part of the Christian Reformed Church happens after the Second World War with basically Dutch refugees that go to Canada and California. And of course, they didn't have any language for trauma. This group of people were very energetic. When I was just in Canada at Synod, Nate Bendenon, who's in the corner, Nate was, telling me about how these people came from the Netherlands, and wow, they saved their money. They poured all their pennies into Christian schools, into churches, into Christian universities, and they just were laser focused. But, an element here that I think, one person, Face Spaces has been a relatively new and regular contributor to comments on the channel in some really interesting ways. She's challenging the war metaphor here, and there's a fair point in that, because if you look at, let's say, the post-war consensus, we think about the Second World War. If you keep sort of following that conversation, it won't take long, at least in America, and you'll bump into the Civil War. And so there is a way in which war is something that impacts at every level. And so when you use it as a metaphor here, and so then after the Second World War, the thing that America did was, I don't know that America, dealt with its trauma. It had less trauma than the rest of the world. But what it turned to was consumerism. And there's very interesting studies about how Americans consume way more. I mean, part of the challenge that China faces is their people save money. We Americans, we spend. And I think that's tied in here.
Well, regarding war metaphors, I think they can be useful, but I do think we also need to be thoughtful about them. Like, why are we using them? Are they really the best metaphors? This reminds me that I recently reconnected with a friend who is very strongly partisan for the Democratic Party. So whatever the leftish thing of the moment is, he'll be all over that. And I hadn't talked to him in maybe a year, but within the first few minutes of my talking to him, he brought up that he thought it was great that Luigi Mangione shot that CEO. And, and I said, well, I don't think that's good because murder is wrong. And
Radical
and
take, Laura.
And he said, but we're in a war, right? It's a war out there. And so why would it have been wrong for Ulysses S. Grant to shoot someone, but it's not wrong for this guy to shoot the healthcare CEO? You know, this is what we need to be doing. So I don't know what we want to do with that.
The thing that really caught me about Zach's divorce and death is I think about Scott and Lacey Peterson, which is a celebrated case from a number of years back here in Northern California. Beautiful young wife, pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, he kills her. And it's like, and her mother was like, couldn't you have just left her?
Yeah, I don't even know how to like say anything better than that. Like it's the we're talking about war. I think someone in the comments is like war is hell, and divorce is probably the closest thing that I've been to war. Let's just say that. That's probably a truthful statement. And there gets to be those moments where it's so intense that you start to be able to rationalize and justify certain behaviors that are definitely not modeled by Jesus. Like you just, you can, I don't know if this is going to turn into a sort of a just war debate in this estuary meeting or something like that. But you really don't see a lot of examples of Jesus picking up his fists after being struck on the cheek or being whipped with the cat of nine tails or being crucified even. And I'm always encouraged and stunned actually by the examples of the early church, being fed to the lions. And there's a book called Quo Vadis. It's
Great novel.
Film. Yeah,
Great novel.
It's the best book I've ever read.
Yeah.
And it goes into amazing detail. Actually, also somebody who got into politics and became the governor of New Mexico, I believe. I have that right. Lew Wallace arrested Billy the Kid. I don't know where this trivia is coming from, but he wrote this novel about this experience of Christians not fighting back. And obviously we're sitting here, 2,000 years later with Christianity is the dominant, force in the world and in some ways, in that spiritual way, I would argue.
So one interesting thing, I guess, building off that, Zach, and what you said, Laura, and then in the comments, people saying, the war analogy is maybe not the best. I think one of the things that seemed really, or that struck a chord with me in what Jordan was saying is reframing things. I speak for my generation, the examples he gave, buying a home, raising a family, reframing things that are not typically thought of within an analogy like warfare or anywhere near an analogy like warfare, and reframing them as acts of war or on one side of war. And then you pair that with, I think someone else in the comments said, it's scary when a spiritual war becomes material. And that's where I think these things connect together and make the warfare analogy pretty apt, is someone who, I don't want to say anyone in particular, but someone who's in a situation where a divorce causes them to be so depressed and anxious that they take their own life, or a situation in a marriage or a job or whatever that causes them to be in such a low place that they take their own life, like that. I feel like it's very valid to view that as a casualty of war. And then on the other side, these redemptive efforts, if you can call them those, of day-to-day life, that's family life, that's having the courage to raise a big family when you're not sure you can pay for it, or you have the community to support you, the courage to build a community when everyone around you, no one on your street really knows each other's names, things like that are not necessarily, we don't think of that in the frame of warfare. And I think that's what maybe struck the chord with me with Jordan's tweet was, and for my own personal situation of being in my mid-20s and really trying to make these things happen for myself, for my some of our closest friends who also have toddlers that are trying to figure all this out right now in our church. It feels like war, and sometimes, often, especially with reference to what Jordan was saying with older generations, I could use my mom as an example. Like that doesn't register for her, being in her late 60s, from her generation. It doesn't. I don't want to be just that millennial who's complaining to the boomers, but there is a genuine disconnect there where she struggles to understand, hey, the things that were so easy for you, my parents are divorced as well, so like the things that were so easy for you and dad, of buying a home that could house your 3 kids, and then feeling like you guys could get a divorce and it wouldn't permanently damage your kids and this and that, like, man, the mask has come off, like, both economically and all these things that make it difficult to do something like buy a house or raise a family, and then the negative effects that come downstream of making those decisions, like getting a divorce or changing jobs, moving, all these things, or lack of building great community, right? And so I think that's where the warfare analogy is really apt, and I would just push back a little bit on that.
Maybe another analogy we could introduce is the concept of adventure. Because traditionally an adventure is where, you set off into the unknown, you're taking risks, all kinds of things might happen to you, you're relying on God's guidance or, something else that might be like intangible. That can maybe also be a useful metaphor for the kinds of things that young people have to do these days. I don't know.
I too put me kind of in the camp of being a little uncomfortable with the frame. I like and respect Jordan and have gained a lot from him, but it wasn't clear to me whether he was saying gird for battle, prepare for war, or if he was saying try to avoid it. Sometimes history comes knocking on your door, and there's no way to opt out, and you should pray that never happens to you, right? When it does, well then, yeah, hard choices, right? And so Jonathan Majot was just on Voice, and he talked about the good war. There's almost like you can almost feel it in the zeitgeist. There's this kind of like hankering for let's have a clarifying event, right? And I can imagine the other frame that I struggle with is the generational frame. We do it a lot around here. I did it. Gray, speaking from his experience as a young millennial, I can see why, looking at the boomers, it's easy to just look at all those people, and they don't know how hard it is now, and they're and just like the war analogy or frame, Chad pointed out, he wasn't using a metaphor, he was describing war. Right? So the frame is what I'm concerned about, and I'm also concerned about the frame of generations, because you still actually have to act in the world as a person, and so my sense is those kind of frames tend to be self-reinforcing. So discussion of war makes war more likely. Looking at things through the lens of generations makes us other each other in ways that maybe aren't helpful. It doesn't mean that there isn't anything to be learned or gained. It doesn't mean that it isn't helpful to sort of, in terms of just how to think about something. But once you have to take action, I liked where you started, Laura. Who's the enemy? And if you have ready answers for that, well, you might have already halfway slipped into the frame, right? Who knows? On this call, just the 6 of us, are there enemies here? And this is what war does, right? It makes you stop trusting each other. So, this is no shade toward Jordan. He's a brilliant guy, but I don't love the frame.
I'd like to jump in on that. One of the things that I've noticed is there is this real hesitancy to talk about it as a war. And James Davidson Hunter, I think his name was, he wrote the book in 1991 on, the culture wars. And I believe he's the one who sort of coins that, if memory serves. And I'm curious as to why there's such a why does it make everyone so uneasy to talk about it as war. And again, I'm not pro-war, right? But that there seems to be an unwillingness just categorically to understand it as a war. And I think that the metaphor is apt, in part because St. Paul himself invokes it, with let us not forget that we are in a great battle, in a great war against the powers and principalities. And so, to me, my own personal disquietude about using war as a metaphor doesn't change the facts on the ground as far as I can see it. I think it very much is a war that we are going to great lengths to try to pretend it's not a war. And I don't know if you followed that story a couple of weeks back. I wrote a Substack on it about the University of Tulsa honors program, and there was a youngish sort of dynamic academic who was lured away from her tenure position at South Carolina to start an honors program. She's kind of like a great books, classics type person. And they started an honors program at the University of Tulsa. And it was by all of the metrics, right? If I'm running a school, I'm looking at this from a spreadsheet standpoint, it's working. I have a 500% boost in enrollment. I have endowment, grant money coming through. And then a new provost comes through and just shivs her, and it's done. It's over. Right. And I was not at all surprised that the in that particular frame, and in sort of the academic frame, that she was trying to be winsome and win hearts and minds, and her enemies, and those are very real enemies, right? Again, a gun is not obvious, a knife is not obvious, but someone came and took her out and took out that entire program out of jealousy and spite. And so, to me, that is and she, whatever, I'm not sure what she thinks about it. She's sort of rising above, as it were, not sort of talking out of turn. But to me, this is indicative of, the culture war doesn't matter if you want to call it a war or not. It's a very real thing. And this to me hits a lot of what, you talked about, Rod, in terms of, the marriage crisis and those of us who've been through a divorce and all of our families, either personally or right next door, have been affected by. These are wars. Now, who's the big baddie? It's a good question. It's probably powers and principalities, that are using human beings to carry out, the charge of screw tape. And so I wonder why we're so nervous about using the frame of a war when, from my perspective, it very much looks like one to me.
My concern is escalation. The next most likely thing that happens after you escalate is more escalation. And a frame can become a prison. It can become very rigid, and you can get stuck there. And that's why I don't like it.
Yeah, again, I appreciate that. I don't like war either. But this is the condition we find ourselves in. And so as a dad, right, I have a sort of a take on that. As a teacher, I have a take on that. As someone who cares deeply about the next generation and the inability for men and women to get along, I very much see this as a wartime situation. And my gut tells me, my reading suggests that this is a war because this consensus that we all live in, whether we were part of building it up or not, the consensus that we live in has designs that seem to be ratcheting and ratcheting and ratcheting, independent of my personal opinions about not wanting to war with my enemies.
One of the books I read a number of years ago was a book on the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome at this time period. One of the things that I noted in that book was that the legions were constantly fighting during the Peace of Rome. So what did they mean by that? When I was at Synod, Synod is like this. You work from you work from 6 in the morning till 10 at night or 11 at night, especially if I do my little videos at the end. So it's just completely engrossing. And in that time, was Israel at war with Iran? Was America at war with Iran? Have we been at war with Iran for 20 some years since the Iranian Revolution? And then we have this word, the Cold War. So I think everybody here has really good points. And I think it might be helpful to just take a look at that word. And so when Jordan says 5th generation warfare, okay, so now we're trying to get a sense of where the lines are. And part of these lines have everything to do with, I was listening to General Petraeus in this one Aspen conference, and there's this other woman used to run the NSA, and she says, before Russia attacked Ukraine, first there were these cyber wars. And so that's a big deal now, where the computers go and they try to disable things on the other side and infiltrate networks. China, of course, has been, yes, please, we'll make your things for you, and we'll take your technology and we'll use that. And so, and I think the word war, I think it's really helpful if we sort of understand these things. And then the one last point, which is, it's very different when you read the Bible, as all of us have done here, Rod included. The Bible is a very violent book. The Bible is just we're reading the book of Samuel right now with our men's group. It's just violence, 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 violence. And then you get to Jesus in the Pax Romana and Pilate. Jesus did what he did in a time and place that is far more violent than many of us are living now. And, I remember Kenneth Bailey, he was teaching in Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. He was teaching New Testament, and his students were reading that, and they're basically saying, how did Jesus do this for 3 years? We think he would have been offed in the first few weeks.
Yeah.
And if you read the gospel closely, you realize that there were many attempts at Jesus' life. And so, I think both sides, I think here in terms of the war metaphor, have really strong points. And so I'm really glad we're having this conversation. But we have to come to grips with the fact that none of us get out of this world alive. And if we die at 25 or if we die at 85, well, that's a big difference for us. You go and look back 100 years and it's like, do we care? And what does it mean to die? I've seen people dead in their 20s and they linger into their 80s. So this is, wow.
So sorry.
Go ahead, Rod, and then Gray.
Yep.
Whose faith is greater? The one who dies for his faith or kills for his faith? I think, and Foxman made this point, that maybe we're not addressing the point that Jordan was trying to make. And it's easy to gloss over the conditions on the ground that he was trying to show that he understood. And Gray can speak more eloquently to that as a young millennial than I could. And I think it's right that we should not, in this, as we discuss whether we should be discussing it this way, that we don't forget that the reason why he was framing it the way he was is that it's hell out there, right? And so my point is not to deny that. It's not to be Pollyanna and try to put a shine on a turd. It's that, is this the way to talk about it, right? And if you're girding for battle, or if there's a war out there and here's how you can try to stay out of it, or here's how you can prepare, here's how you can protect yourself. Maybe don't send your children into those kind of spaces, things like that. I understand why this is so difficult and so personal. And I understand why people get their dukes up ready to fight. I've said, I don't want to repeat myself.
Order, Christian Baxter, what say you?
Were y'all talking about the Jordan Hall tweet or Jordan?
Yeah.
Jordan Peter? Okay, yeah.
Jordan Hall tweet.
I wasn't 100% because I got in probably like 45 minutes ago or so didn't want to go all the way back. But yeah, the question it seemed like people were talking about his reference to be like the fifth generation warfare. Are we in war? Is that, and it's just, I don't know what the original question was that was put forth. So maybe I'll ask that and then come back around and try to get in a thought. But that was kind of, I had some thoughts, but I wanted to get what the original, what the original.
We
press
read
was.
the tweet, and
Okay.
and Gray he also the war, but also the local. I mean,
Okay,
that's the thing. That's why I wanted to get us off. That's one aspect of the tweet, but it was also, I mean, his way to fight the war is specific.
Yep. To go, yeah. And that's been, I've had him on the podcast 3 times, and we've hit that very, about the hyper locality, because I'm in a town about the size of the one he landed in. And the I'll kind of go into the personal, which I do a lot, but because I'm not as well read as many people here. So that's like, I'm drawing more from that well. And the thing about that is, when I was fired and I asked to go, me and my wife asked to, about 6 months later, to go back to our church. One of the elders said, we had a meeting, and one of the elders said, since you've decided to stay.
Wow.
It wasn't a choice. Like, I think when you're that embarrassed and that ashamed in a town of 10,000 for being fired for infidelity in a town you grew up in at a large local church, the temptation is to leave, because it's incredibly ashamed and embarrassing. Like, I didn't want to go to any restaurant. I didn't want to go shopping. I didn't want to see anybody for probably like a year or two. But it was kind of an obtuse question, because both of our support systems were in our local town, both of our families. When all of my resume was built on being a worship leader, and that is no longer a viable option because of the choices that I made, still when we decided to remain married, I had to ask the question, where do I go try to get some random job states away just to hide? Because that was what I think he was implying. Since you've decided to stick around here, I had no choice, because our only support for a family of 3 trying to rebuild our life was family, and deep family that had deep roots in this community. Both of our parents were from here, and built life here, and had reputation here, and had network here, and had all these things. And so, but the modern sensibility, and this is to Jordan's point, is you should just be able to go and pick up and go somewhere and reestablish life and be better. That makes absolutely no sense. John Here's just released a podcast from a random guy that lives in Korea, and South Korea, and I don't know, I haven't listened to but like 15 minutes of it, but the title is something like, maybe nepotism should be the thing. And I kind of, what I'm trying to describe is a type of, we were able to survive because of family and remain intact and rebuild a life of stability because of, but not only family, specifically Christian family. And when this whole question of go to church, this oversimplification of that, Paul, that you mentioned early towards the later part of it, I don't want to oversell church. Church, yes. Family ethos grounded in church, but we needed 3 meals or 4 meals a night at our parents' house to survive. And church can't exactly do that. And to Gray's point about where he should go, they have some kind of like where they're at, some questions that they're asking related to losing his job. And like this idea of like, I want to go deep, and I could hear the evangelical ease coming off of his tongue, life together and this community and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know where and his wife has a good job, sounds like, but he has these other values that he's trying to figure out the stack, and these questions that Jordan's poking at about locality. Jordan has, you know, he made some significant wealth. He talks about how it's not the same and all that kind of stuff is where that is now. However, I've made the point that to go do life in a city, apart this idea that we're sold that you can just do anything anywhere as long as you have the material resource, that costs about $350,000 a year now. If you really want to, the elites go to cities and they create small towns inside those cities and they subsidize it with a lot of money. So like, he's asking that question and I'm asking the question back to it. I hope that I can have a conversation. I reached out to him on Twitter just a second ago. But the question being, rebuilding your life. A buddy of mine moved back to our small town that he was raised in, and he moved back because his grandfather had raised a family of 5 or 6, and he lives in like Springfield, Missouri, and all of his kids moved away and lived the American dream, in engineers and you know, white collar professionals, and he's alone. And he looked at his grandfather and he said, I don't want that life, and I don't want that life for my parents. I'm going to go move back home. So those are some of the questions that the kind of post-war consensus American dream of you can go be whoever you want to be, and some of the material wealth that has faded for the next generations. Like, there is something to the clickbaity type of nepotism, and I think his point is not just like a rich person allows a rich person to get another job, but like, I think something more along the lines of family and community. And I'll stop there. I went long, but I appreciate you guys.
Any response to Christian?
Yeah, I just really quick say that one of the things that soured me to sort of conservative ink was when, you know, the big sort of voices were just sort of blithely saying, you know, these people in Washington, D.C. and whatnot, just like, oh, like if you can't get a job, just move. And it was just this complete ignorance and ignorance of the need for locality as part of human flourishing. So I love the fact that you said, screw it, I'm staying. So,
and I love it. Anything that's an antidote to the thinky talky.
Can't hear you, Rod. Speak into that mic.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Anything that's an antidote to the thinky talky. So thanks for bringing it, Christian.
Yeah. And you know, it's, again, Paul Renee's, he's looking for, there's these interesting trade-offs with the village. I mean, Paul Renee talks about the fact that villages are being torn apart and just absorbed by cities, and that's true.
Yeah.
But you and your wife, to one degree or another, had parents that could be relied upon. And I'll tell you, if you go back and watch through Phil Nicholson, when he found the corner, he watched through every Randos conversation that I had done by that. There were hundreds by that point. But if you go through those conversations, what you will hear is divorce, 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 divorce. And so often people in their, it's almost a, you know, so often people, when they marry, what is one of the things beneath the waterline that they're trying to do? They're trying to fix their parents' marriage in their marriage. And they're, you know, this domicide, we're looking for home, you know, Hebrews 11. So yeah, all those are there. And so the irony is that I'm sure at a point, Christian, you would have loved to have fled. You would have, and many people do. Many people do. But you also knew, what was that going to cost your children who you loved? What was that going to cost your wife who you loved? Was it going to cost your family who you loved? And so you stayed in the pressure cooker, and that pressure cooker then became a space in which, you know, healing could take place and restoration could happen. So but there are other times people stay in the pressure cooker and it destroys them.
Yeah.
So, no, true. All right, Sam.
Christian, you're a great talker. I love listening to you talk.
Thanks,
you
man.
have that sort of Southern storytelling skill. That's nice.
So, that Wendell Berry point somebody also put in there too. You
know? And yes, I would say I am flexing my hair. It's turning gray, but it's not falling out. And so,
impressive.
you know,
impressive.
Great.
What can I
Thanks,
do?
Sam.
Stetson
Way to rub it in.
I mean, Stetson over there. Look at that. You know, he's got like, you know, a
Serious
Viking,
lettuce.
you know, yeah. Anyway, so, but I could not compete with many of the men here in chin hair. So
Me either.
I can't even do that well, frankly. This is the best I can do.
I've been thinking about, how do you tell a friend from an enemy? And that's been something that I've been thinking about recently. There are all in a couple different areas of my life. And like what Rod was saying, when an enemy comes, or when someone's coming to mess with you, I think Rod might have used more colorful language than that. You know, you change your approach and you be on your guard and you interact differently. Okay, but what if the enemy thinks that they're being nice and doesn't think that they're your enemy, and they're so convinced of their own niceness that they don't even think that they're messing with you? All right?
You want what's best for you.
Many such cases.
Many.
Remember,
especially in churches.
Especially in churches. I'm not going to spill beans on who precisely I'm talking about, but you all can fill in blanks in your mind what I might be suggesting. But there are also, I'm on the school board. There's also a lot of situations that are like that in schools.
Schools too. Oh yeah.
Schools. Oh my goodness, it's full of people who think that they're doing the right thing.
Any kind of committees of all types.
Committees writ large are. There might be some.
Any do-gooding community.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The economy of Africa.
The economy. Except any committees led by PVK that are restructuring denominational publications. Those, I'm sure, are good committees. I look forward to Paul getting his call from Trump to be in charge of the dissolution of NPR. That would be, I think that he has demonstrated his suitability for such a project. I mean, it's basically the same thing, right? It's the banner is NPR, PBS, mainstream media, right? It's microcosm, macrocosm. That's what we always tell you, Paul. We like listening to you because you have a ton of your story, your battles, and your denomination are peculiar and unique, but also resonant with lots of other things.
I actually have some insights on that question. If you want to engage on that a little bit,
Rod, go for it.
The 2 or 3% of the population that are actually, well, I'll stick with your frame, messing with you deliberately on purpose, some Machiavellian scheme, or they're just assholes. It's probably more than 3% of those. The comment I made was actually more for the people you're talking about, actually, because they're way more plentiful, right? You will encounter them almost everywhere you go, and so I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a nuance that I had skipped over. That's actually really important, and that basically requires you to be dealing with people who are self-aware enough to know what their actual motivations are, and they often aren't. So the way I tend to approach that kind of situation is I try to essentially discern what I think their motivations are, even if they don't know what they are, right?
Yeah.
And then basically operate with that in mind.
But then you can get a little paranoid, a little delusional. That's a temptation with going too far in that direction. Is that you can misattribute malevolence to them in a way that is hypersensitive, not fair, those sorts of things. If you go too far in that direction and all these people think they're nice, but secretly they're really out to get me, and I know the truth, right? You can get that too far in that direction is paranoia.
Totally agree. What I would say is that I don't assume malevolence. In other words, they may be messing with me and whatever it is that I care about, but that doesn't mean necessarily that if I were them, I wouldn't be doing the same thing, right? So in other words, I don't attribute malevolence. I just try to understand where they're coming from, even if it is completely contrary to whatever it is that I care about or whatever I'm trying to accomplish, right? So I don't need to attribute evil or bad intentions to them. I can just say, this person's clearly trying to undermine or trying to manipulate or trying to, they're doing something. They're playing some game, right? And why are they doing that? And if I can put myself in their shoes and try to understand where they're coming from, and as I said, perhaps imagine the possibility that if I were them, I would do the same thing, right? Then that. So it's more navigating. It's more, right. It's more just trying to, and because if someone is actually out to get you, try to avoid them if you can. Basically, that's my position. Unless if you're forced to defend yourself or something or someone you care about, well, then you're going to have to. But if you don't have to, try to avoid them.
You posted that picture of you. You posted one of your downtown clock, like to me and Kale, and then you also did one of like just like a Midwestern field. Like this could be the Shire, or this could be a hill in the English countryside or something. It was like it's an interesting thing about. I don't know if you have idea or thoughts about like the relationships between small towns and cities, like, what's going on right now.
Yeah, I definitely resonated with what you said in that live stream, that the cities have swallowed up small towns. Because even as I go through my small towns history, it's well documented. All the industry that was here is just gone. And we had a college here that was Lincoln College, named after Abraham Lincoln, from like the 60s, 1860s.
Wow.
And it just recently closed. Our Christian liberal arts college closed. Like now we had a big weed plant that opened.
What a contrast.
I know, man. It's tough out here. We've lost, but in the middle of the century, where Kale says the bodies are buried, is where stuff went down. Post World War II, like watch Mad Men if you've never seen it. Like it dramatizes and documents the decaying, the subtle gradual decay of culture, and it has to do with like consumerism and propaganda as marketing became an industry, a huge industry, advertising, and like just serving mammon. Like I wonder if, like, as we search for like what's the smoking gun here, like what's the culprit for how we got here, if part of the reality is like, guys, all my family has been here for a long ass time. Like the street my grandmother still lives on, that whole block was just family members of hers. My dad would visit a house here or there every once in a while. I have been to another house on that block 0 times. So like all my lineage and ancestry is still here. You want to know like my connection level to all that? Like it disintegrated right in front of my eyes, So it's like, but why is that? Is it just because, time and distance, and I'm not as related as my grandma or my dad was? Sure. But part of it is just like our ancestors just sold meaning for privacy and more money. Not maybe our actual ancestors, but like our people, the post, like, there's no reason to blame a particular generation. It's just growth of technology and more wealth. It's like, what if there's no big bad guy at the top? It's just like, we just wanted more comfort, more privacy. And so we gave up because your most meaningful cohesive moments in life in our world are not, maybe it's a family vacation, but it's probably like when you're reaching out to your family for help, like postpartum. It's probably when disaster strikes. Like I heard you talk about that a bit today too. It's like, it's probably when, even like on a mission trip or something like that, it's like what makes your group is that you are not everyone else. You are not at home. We gave away the conditions it takes for cohesion, and I
quit believing it. We quit believing it, and even to your Mad Men illustration, at that last scene is like the hippie movement, Coca-Cola, and like, I guess Don Draper's just kind of like, fuck it, like this is it, like what am I just?
Well, what's
go ahead.
Weird about that, the last scene is that his breakthrough, his transformation leads to a marketing campaign to make Coca-Cola even more of a monopoly. And it's not like Coca-Cola is a great product. Like, yeah, it tastes good, but it's like, that's what it led to. That was the fruit of it. Is whatever transcendence and transformation the culture that Don Draper lived in, which was the 60s, the 70s, the fruit of that culturally at the time, like the telos was to feed the beast, to feed the machine, to feed big corporate daddy. Like that was it. Even then, you know. Now,
yet it was using the hippie free love, like against the man image.
Yeah.
Those pictures I posted of those families, that was my mom's family on X. Of the my grandfather he worked for Lifeway, which used to be called the Baptist Sunday School Board in Nashville, and that picture of that black and white picture of all those kids around was used as on their publication that was sent to like every Baptist person in America, Southern Baptist person, at the time, kind of like the banner but bigger.
Yeah,
because they had a high rise downtown Nashville. That was their publishing house. And he was basically, he had a team like Don Draper of people that were doing, and I have a picture of them on like American Airlines steps, like going into a plane. My grandfather's leading a team of like 8 or 10 men that all look like madmen doing that thing in the 60s.
Yeah.
And then the other picture was 10 years later of my my aunts and uncles and my mom, like after the hippie revolution, and none of his sons became ministers or did ministry, and the daughters all went to LA and worked in Hollywood, and like my mom was like went to Baylor and was like, I don't know what to do. You need to quit paying for my thing. She just dropped out of school because it was like, you know, like it all disintegrated. And yet there are these pieces of tradition that were bound into their family through that kind of hyper traditional culture that they were presenting that still made it through. And I sat down with my daughter today, and we were like, my in-laws have a pool that they've kept going since my wife was in high school, in like elementary school. It's like amazing that it still works as good as it does. And like my kids are swimming with their cousins, and I'm just like telling my daughter who's 15, I'm like, this doesn't happen by accident. And like what you are, this fruit that you're like, that we're experiencing right now is, it's intentional because a man made a decision to not be like his father. And then like, and he built a life for his family, and they created something stable that was built on their faith. And it's like, I can't even I wasn't really saying that, but I wasn't telling her what I was told and what you were probably told. Hey, go get a degree and be whoever you want to be. I was telling her, like, you should try to like keep this alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to say that. And you know, there's a certain aspect where kids are going to go and do, and prodigal or not prodigal and all this kind of stuff, but maybe consider that this is something like, my dad still owns 100 acres of the 1,000-acre farm that my grandfather bought after he sold the mine after World War II. And he, like my aunt and uncle, sold off the back 300 and took their inheritance, right? And my dad held on to the land for ill or for better. He held on for this little piece of land that I take my kids to, you know, once or twice a month, and we ride a go-kart, or we go four-wheeling, or we walk in the creek, and I sit there, and it's this kind of, you look out on this landscape, and I'm just like, and he held on. He knew that there was something and he, from the porch of the house that his great-grandfather and grandfather built, and his dad built, or my great-grandfather and my grandfather built, that I was raised in, happened to move back to restore that house when I was 7. We moved from Nashville and Fort Worth. And I just am like, there's something here that's worth preserving. Like if I don't help preserve these bits right here, then it does go away.
Yeah.
Like that last, like 1,000 acres goes to 10 and 5, you know, it's gone. And it's like, and the way that that's done best is through family or through adoption. And my dad was adopted from South Korea. So how weird is that he's the one holding on to this farmland? Like,
Yeah.
but, you know, to point, like that's now seen as, oh, you're talking about, you look at this, the Trump family thing, and it's like, that's wrong that his family benefits from his work. And there's something to that I like whatever nepotism, like I understand the abuses, or like people don't like that kings and their sons with no merit did this X, Y, and Z or whatever. But there's something else there too. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. It's kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't forgotten your point about cities and small towns either, but
sorry, I kind of
no, there's, yeah, I think it's like, if you're going to go the hardcore, like Christian route, like telos, and just live out, forsaking the world, like that's fine. And,
like that priestly act or that monastic.
Yeah.
Or
like to be, some sort of monasticism, whether that's actual or
missionary.
like, yeah. But if you're going to have a conversation and sort of like dismiss what you're saying, but then have other opinions, political opinions or opinions on the culture or civilization, I don't think you can do that, because the whole reason you have civilization is because families and tribes linked up and started a thing emerged. Like that, the basis, the thing that keeps it alive is families. And obviously that has a very, like, what we would view as a dark side if you just look at any sort of archaeological record from like the pre-Christian era. But what we know as civilization is, and Peterson pointed this out early on, is a miracle. Like, it's a miracle that we're talking and that things run well, that I'm not really worried about anyone breaking in tonight. I'm in a small town, like my car's unlocked.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty impressive. And I mean, there's a lot of dark things to point out for sure, but like, just, like I flush my toilet and it just goes somewhere that's maintained. Like I turn water on, it gets hot. If something goes wrong, I can call. Like, these things are miracles, like, but the basis of that, what we've forgotten, and if you're going to have opinions on that, is you have to be pro-family, what you're talking about. And it's like, if I were to have, so I'm in a position right now, technically I'm an electrician. It's not my favorite topic in the world, because I don't like spend every day joyfully wiring crap up.
I'm a nurse, dude. I talk about it like 3% on this channel.
Yeah, you get it. You pay the bills, you do your job as a man, and then people say, how's work going? And you go, oh, I guess I'll give you a little bit, but I really don't want to talk about it. So I work at a very small company. There's like a handful of guys who work there, maybe a couple handfuls part-time. Just started up by my boss's dad, and then his two sons run two branches of the company, and he kind of oversees it. So I'm in a super nepotistic environment, and I receive, they treat me well, but I'm not a son.
Yeah. I
could get bitter about that, because if I was, would I have the ability to do what they're doing? Yes, I could. I would have to work longer hours. And like, if he called me up, and like, it's a very patriarchal thing. Like, they obey their dad, if he wants an errand done at 7 p.m. or to go make a bid or whatever. But they do well. They do very well for themselves, and they treat their employees well. But my point is, like, I could just look at my position and my ceiling, because it's not very high. It's a small company, very small, and get bitter. Or I could just go, dude, that's how it is. Like, if you had because they also, his sons aren't bad guys either. They treat their workers well too. So it's like, if I had a business and sons, and my sons were good guys, if I were to like grade all my employees on paper, would my son score at the top? Even if he was good enough, obviously I'm giving the business to him. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you can't say that as a Christian, just like as a basic matter of fact, obviously that's not like that's just basic 101, just human acting, you know.
But there's a narrative where that's seen as, and there's like a conversation. It's like, well, that's his effing son, you know. Like there's a thing that's seen as a very negative thing.
Yeah, and I think it gets at what you're pointing at, which is maybe liberalism is the wrong word, but just some sort of weird identity breakdown virus in the air that looks at that and goes, "That's wrong." And this gets at what I felt was a bit of a Rorschach test,
because it's not fair. It's not fair or quote unquote just, right? If he's not the best, it's not a meritocracy at that point.
Yeah, but that gets into like just like private property though. And I don't even mean from like a John Locke perspective. I mean just like even like the Catholic tradition, like, you know, Pope Leo the current, named after the 13th, and the new thing. What's the Latin for new thing? Anyway, whatever the main Catholic social teaching document, Latin for the new thing, was written by the 13th. It's a really easy read. I'll find it in a second. Anyway, it's a very simple name. I just can't think of it right now. But it lays out just a basic defense of just like if humans can't own their stuff, then what, like there's no civilization. But obviously the Christian ideal, this is a Catholic document, right? So they're saying this just for like, you know, countries amidst the Industrial Revolution. But obviously in their tradition, their ideal is still a monastic who gives up all property rights. You can have both. You can have both speeds. And this is, I think, specifically like when people say Protestant and they critique something, a lot of times they mean evangelical, but it's like early reformers look at their like liturgy and Mariology. But what I'm about to say, the whole not understanding the two-speed religion thing and the difference between like the standard, like the good and the ideal, is really a Protestant weak spot for sure.
Yes, 100%.
And even I'm an Anglican, so they tried to take. People will look at a map at all the monasteries that closed after Anglicanism sort of took root. And there's two sides to that story. I mean, English monastics were pretty corrupt at the time, but they did throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what they did is they took the monastic lifestyle. You know, you're praying every 3 hours, and then did it like twice a day, and it was like a family village thing. And so like literally my church, before my former priest moved away and now we're searching for a new one, every weekday morning and evening was 7:30 and 4:30, 7:30 and 5:30, morning and evening prayer, just like 15-minute liturgy. There's scripture reading, some prayers, some creeds, maybe a psalm, you know, just a basic like little prayer liturgy. But it's like it's a distilled version of what would happen in a monastery for like hundreds of years. But it's the idea is that, we're going to bring it for everyone for the village, and there's a good thing to that. But society and the church, there's something to that two-speed principle, like having these guys are out there going, like living the ideal. They gave up all property rights and the right to a spouse and all this stuff. And, but that doesn't negate the good of family life and property rights. So I say all this to say, with the whole bringing up the Catholic social teaching, that there's something in the air that just says any of that, any prop or like too much ownership, too much nepotism, too much tribal pride, like, or I guess too much of it is bad, but any of it is bad. And and Pajot is really hinting at this, and it's uncomfortable for him to talk about because I think he's right, you know? And like I said, like my work situation is uncomfortable. It's like, will I be there forever? No. And that's my prerogative. And it's because my ceiling's only so high, you know?
Well, and to that point is like, well, what if you did go independent at some point? And do you have a son? Did you say you had a son? And like, what if, like, because you saw that pattern, like, well, I would actually want that for my son. If I had created something successful, or to whatever degree that is, and I could share that with him, and we could partake in this thing together and protect it together. Like that scene, there's like you said, it's almost like where any of that is wrong. And I think that, and so as a result, like you shouldn't want your kids to have, there's a flattening there. And even to the point when you were talking about two speeds, and I think I heard Kale mention that exact phrase today on the stream, but the thing about that is, when you come from the evangelical kind of mainstream church, American culture, you can throw parts of charismaticism in there, is okay. Well, at least in the kind of the loosely reformed Baptist evangelical world, it's like the preacher will get up and be like, you're looking for that ideal from this guy, right? But then that guy will say, but I'm probably the chief of sinners in here, or I'm just like you, and that's a confusing thing, because I think we don't want perfection from that office, but we do want something more than us from that office.
Yeah.
That, and that complete flattening you're talking about is a problem, I think, related to that.
But it also plays into your whole subsidiary thing also, which is a breakdown of identity. Like, even if you look at like a far right movement like Nazi Germany, that also collapsed local identity, which is why no one knows the country of Bavaria. Like you might, if you're familiar with German heritage or something, but like there's a reason it's not a country anymore, or has a specific identity. I mean, it does if you go there, I'm sure, but not as, but part of reclaiming that is unflattening the world is like you brought up the couple posts I've made from my hometown, where if I frame it a certain way, you can see it idealized. Like you can be like, well, that's awesome. But it's like, dude, this is a boring ass town. People walk by it every day. And it's like, what is it? Is it that it's not as cool as how I'm making it to be? I'm not even making it that cool. I'm just giving a quick frame and saying, what is this? Is this an obscure Midwest town or something else? I'm trying to show
the Shire.
Yeah. I'm trying to say, like, we're not seeing things like as they are. And if we saw things as they are, if we saw the mundane the right way, and this is why like Chesterton is my guy, because he can just like talk about a tree for like two pages and be like, you're not seeing it. Like when you're on a walk at night and you see like 150-foot tree in the air, that should like rock your socks off. But it just becomes familiar, it's just there. It's like, that's an incredible thing. It's like 120 years old. It shoots to the sky like taller than any building would have shot up until like 5 seconds ago. Mm-hmm. Like it's an amazing thing, or like when you see like imagine like, anyway, my point is to reclaim more of a local identity. I just think people have to be more okay with finding the transcendent in the boring, because there's a reason people like cities. Like I have relatives who are like, oh, boring. Like I got to be somewhere where there's a Top Golf. I'm like, well, that's the death of culture. Like, like if I'm sorry, there's not a Target nearby. And I mean, my wife jokes about this too. I'm not shaming anyone who thinks this way, but if you really do want to like have a local identity, you've got to play the card your dad's playing, where it's like, yep, until like I'm totally out, I'm not giving up this place. Chesterton said Rome isn't loved because she's beautiful. She's beautiful because she's loved.
Yeah.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. The ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. The hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. cling to a life vest, treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend, always on the brink of somewhere, each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river, dreamt in the sunshine, Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us, baptized in ball pits, a clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please, say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host, who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th, in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Peugeot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.